Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bull City Coordinators Duke Football Coverage Podcast. You know where to find us, you know where to listen to us, you know what our website is and where we are on the socials. So we're going to skip all that and just get straight into the episode. This is our season prediction. Season prediction for 2025. We've got a returning guest. It is our old friend, Duke football legend, Lee Rodio. Lee, how are you, sir?
Doing great, boss man. How you doing? Good to be back
Um,
with you.
well, thank you for coming on. I appreciate it. I'm glad we could set this up. And most importantly, tell us what you have been doing since last year when you last graced us on the podcast.
Wow. Okay, since last year, it's been a fairly uneventful year. Got married, had a nice honeymoon in there. Trying to keep my head above water in the legal world. Um, my lovely wife, God bless her, hadn't gotten tired of me yet, so we're hanging in there. And back managing a campaign for the first time in a couple years against probably my better judgment, but my inability to say no to things is one of my best traits, I guess. So here we are.
Well, has your wife started putting pressure on you yet to relocate back to the Roanoke Valley?
I have to say, I think I think if we were to relocate anywhere, the Roanoke Valley would probably be fairly low on her list. That's more one of those great appreciation for it growing up, but I don't know that she has many aspirations to relocate anytime soon.
Well, let her know our law office is now out in the county. We moved out of the city. We left
All right,
downtown and we are now in the county.
there you
So
go.
we got
Just old,
tired
just
of
an old country lawyer.
yeah, well, we got tired of the interesting stop bys that we would have. And some guys started using our or the parking lot to detail his car. That was kind of interesting. His
Uh,
girlfriend showed up a couple of times and watched him. He would skateboard around in the parking lot, and we didn't own it, so we couldn't ask him to leave. Um, the evening of the Birmingham Bowl, some guy tried to break into our office and did. Um, he stole some candy and a soda 2 days before Jesus's birthday. Um, so that was interesting. I got a call about it, and from one of the paralegals who was watching the ring camera, and I said, "Well, I'm in Georgia right now, coming back from Alabama, so you might want to call Devin or the police." So anyway, we just had a lot of interesting people stop by downtown, and we decided it was time to relocate.
You
So
got to wonder on the burglary hierarchy. You would think that law firms would be fairly safe. I guess maybe people think there's petty cash. I don't know.
my theory was the guy apparently had just gotten out, and I
Ah,
think he wanted to get back in. Some folks have a hard time adjusting to being
mm,
out, and so I think that's kind of what was at play more than anything else. There were a
yeah.
lot of other interesting folks we had stop by. So, but that's hopefully we're not going to have that problem. We are right across from where our kids go to school,
Nice.
so it should be a lot easier with the kids playing sports to make games and not have to go cross town. So
See, now that you're just an old country lawyer, you got to invest in a seersucker suit and a straw hat. And
I do. I actually did get a seersucker suit for a wedding that I have to go to,
nice.
as a joke. And so I do have that. I don't know about the straw hat though. I don't have a bow tie. I don't think I have the body habitus for a bow tie.
I gotta wear my seersucker strategically. And when you're in court, if you're, Fayetteville West, it's probably better not to wear it. When you're in court, Fayetteville East, it's generally an asset to wear it. So it's very very geographically diverse down here.
Well, that's one of those things you got to know when you're deciding what to do and what attire to wear. We have that discussion as lawyers at our age about what kind of watches you wear into court.
Yep.
Uh, I always try to go as low key with mine as possible. I was talking to some guys who he's got an extensive watch collection. I think he's got like a Rolex or something real fancy like that. I don't remember if it's a Rolex or an Omega or whatever, but he and I were both saying you can never wear a watch like that to court because I mean, if a jury sees that, because we do both do personal injury work, represent plaintiffs. I mean, we're just so afraid that they would think that, oh, this guy's just a mill and he's just taking all these cases and generating all this money and all this stuff. And they'd think negative things about us, all the stereotypes. So that's one of those things that those of you who might consider becoming a lawyer, think about when you're in court, what watch you wear if you wear a watch. So just keep that in mind. And I don't know how you all feel about this. I see police officers, court security officers with smart watches. I would be terrified to wear a smart watch into court because God forbid it start ringing and you
Uh-huh.
think you've turned off your phone,
Yep.
but you haven't turned off your watch, the
Yep.
phone part of it. So just keep that in mind.
Best laid plans.
I know, I know. But enough about that. Enough about that. Let's discuss what we're here to discuss, which is how the Blue Devils are going to do this season. A lot of optimism. And as someone who is subscribed to On Three, has talked to Steve Weissman and also Connor O'Neill, I'm feeling a little more optimistic about that, about the chances that the Blue Devils have to have a nice season. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I'm getting a little bit more optimistic. Just quickly, big picture thoughts on the team before we go through game by game.
I think one of the good things about this year and also could just as easily be a curse of this year is that I think we're going to know what we got pretty soon. I think aside from Clemson, the biggest test on the schedule is Illinois week 2. And I think it also is a very good test because it is Duke's not one of those schools that people tend to you got to go out and beat the Ole Misses of the world to actually, have any relevance. Duke, thank God we're finally out of the, Northwestern series, but, you know, Big Ten schools tend to be fairly good barometers early season, just their style of play, the difference in physicality. And this being a traditional Big Ten school, I think it'll be a great barometer for where we are early season.
That was kind of my thought talking with Connor and Steve is that you should have a pretty good idea by week 4 or 5 what this team's going to look like. And I know that's easy to say in 4 or 5, obviously, but I think you'll know certainly after NC State exactly what you can expect from this team. Which, given that there's a new quarterback, I don't want to say an entirely new wide receiver core, but there's 2 all-time great Duke wide receivers that are being replaced. I mean, it'll take a little bit for this team to gel, but hopefully it'll be fast. So let's go through game by game. Start with the Thursday night. Thank you very much, ACC scheduling gods, jerks. Let's go through that, and let's real mad about that. Not going to be able to make that one. And Wallace Wade again, but Lee, who do you have? Duke at home versus the Elon Phoenix.
Ben, are you suggesting, are you exhibiting the gall to suggest that the Elon Phoenix would not be an opponent that would warrant a Thursday night primetime TV slot? I mean, I think the good people of Alamance County might have a word with you about
No,
sort of
I,
assertion.
what I'm suggesting is put it on a Friday night or a Saturday night. That's it. That's all I'm saying.
Fair enough.
Thursday night, I live like 3 hours away. I can't leave at 3:30. Probably have to leave a little bit early to be safe. So you're there till 10:30, 11, and then what do I drive back?
Yeah.
I mean, I can't do that. If I were much younger and couldn't afford season tickets, then I could do it. But then you get back to the problem. I couldn't
Yeah.
afford the season tickets or the trip.
That's fair. I don't think I'm shocking anyone by saying I have the Blue Devils in this one.
I agree with you. I'm going to take Duke. Hopefully, Tim and I will be able to watch it together. I'll be actually driving back from Shenandoah County, or no, we'll be in Winchester, Virginia for deposition. So wouldn't really matter depending on when they leave. God, then you're talking about a 6 hour drive. Good Lord. Okay. Yeah, it's not in the cards. So again, Duke, could you call me before you set the schedule, please? Please. That's all I'm asking. All right.
Yeah. I
Okay.
actually, before we get off of Elon, I do think it'll be a good test. I mean, they're typically a pretty stout team. They're solid FCS competition, and I think it'll be a big opportunity to see what Duke's run game looks like. I think we won't be as, reliant on the run game to give Duke's offense any dimensions this year as we were last year. But Mensa at his best is a play action quarterback, and I think these are the best times to try to get a gauge on how this offensive line group will do, um, just in general, regardless of the competition. So I look for Duke to try to be intentional about establishing the run game here, and that's something you can do with this sort of defense. You don't have to worry about hanging 60 on teams to actually get some good work in.
And looking at what Elon has done in the tenure of its head coach, Tony Trisciani, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If I'm not, I apologize. But they're 32 and 31, 26 and 18 in conference, two straight 6 win seasons, a few years removed from making it to the playoffs for their division. So that's a team you need to play early to hopefully figure some things out and get a nice win. But after that, September 6th, knock on wood, I should be there. At Wallace Wade, the Illinois Fighting Illini are coming to town to play our Blue Devils at noon on ABC or ESPN, noon Eastern, obviously. Lee, who do you got and why?
All right, so I'm going to sound extremely, old fogey-ish here, but I like the Blue Devils for very little having to do with football, actually. I realize in this day and age, rosters are made up of everyone you can imagine from all over the country. But one eternal truism is no matter how high flying they might be, when you take a team like Illinois from the traditional Big Ten part of the country and bring them down into the South, especially for a noon game, especially early in the season, it looks like they're running in quicksand. If you need evidence of this, I know I joke about the Northwestern series with Duke, but a few of my years in undergrad, Northwestern actually had a pretty good squad, except when they came to Wallace Wade. This is not a favorable environment for a team from north of the Mason-Dixon. Especially if the weather holds out as we expect it to. I like Duke in this one, and I like it not to be a, nail biter per se, definitely not a blowout, but I see this as a, 24-14 kind of game.
Earlier this season, I was leaning Illinois, but Connor, his enthusiasm, I think, has infected me. And I am actually going to take Duke to win this game. I agree with you. I think it's going to be tight. I do think that heat, as somebody who has upped his morning runs to 2.5 to 3 miles when I run, and comes back probably sweating out about 5 pounds per run or something in this heat, that spoke to me. So I'm gonna go with Duke in that one. I think it's gonna be a fun game. It's gonna be a tough game, but I think the Blue Devils at home early in the season, some of the inside scoop thought process about it from Lee there has pushed me into the Blue Devil win column. I
And I,
will say though, this is a good team
yeah.
that Illinois has, but I think Duke may have this one. If it were at Illinois, I think it'd be different.
Yeah, I think there's also, Clemson was a little bit guilty of this, even despite their geographic proximity. But I think there is still a little bit of oh, we got to go play at Wallace Wade. Okay, well, we got to, make the marathon walk from the, visitors' locker rooms. Oh, I got to go down. I just don't see this with the aspirations Illinois has this season. I don't see this as a game they have circled on their calendar. I also think it's a great matchup for Duke, positionally speaking. I think it's best on best. their offense on our defense. And I think Duke's is sort of a la Appalachian State, Michigan. I think Duke's very comparative speed plays a big factor in this, and also speed that's used to playing in these weather conditions. So I unironically like Duke for this one.
Well, and looking at who Illinois plays, they've got Western Illinois to start, then Duke, then Western Michigan, and then Indiana ranked 20. I don't know what to expect from that Indiana team this year. I think that's a big question mark for a lot of us. But then you've got a game against unranked preseason USC. Speaking of hot seats. Uh, and then Purdue and then Ohio State. I could see them. It's possible that Illinois could just be saying that Indiana game is the one that matters and not really thinking about the first couple of games because that stretch for them, I think, is a lot more important, perhaps, than going to Duke and beating Duke on the road.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
So
do agree.
we got them undefeated through two. Then a week later, after I get back from giving a presentation at a CLE and I think Fredericksburg, I will hopefully be home in time to watch with Tim the Blue Devils go on the road to Darian Mintz's former home base as Duke will have to take on the Tulane Green Wave in New Orleans, 8 p.m. ESPN2. Who you got, Lee?
So, my concern about this one is not necessarily outcome. My concern about this one is the parallels I see both with time of the season, comparative, skill levels, team to team. I see a lot of undercurrents between this and the Northwestern game. I believe it was 2017 when like half the roster got hurt. It was one of those years Northwestern was down. We were the better team. The game was never really in doubt, but we lost. That was when Mark Gilbert almost pretty much ended his career. Had a couple other key contributors on offense. I really, really worry about the antics in this game. Not to, disparage anybody on Tulane's roster, but human nature is human nature. My biggest concern in this one is not necessarily getting out with the win, it's getting out with health intact. I do like Duke. I do think that, Tulane is a respectable program, that had a great season last year, part of the reason that Darian is in Durham now. But they did get pillaged as far as their roster. They're trying to obviously cobble it back together as all non Texas, Ohio State rosters are these days. But I think the skill level favors Duke in this one, so I'm going to take the Blue Devils.
I also am going to take the Blue Devils in that one, and I am completely spacing on a player. I believe Steve Weissman did a profile about him coming back from injury after he got undercut. I don't want to say undercut, that might be dirty, but he might imply something dirty. He took a Georgia Tech hit
Mm.
to his knee and
A
lower
Paul
leg.
Johnson special.
Yeah, exactly. And then when he came back and played, he put a hit on somebody. I think it was Georgia Tech's quarterback, if I'm remembering it right. And I think that was personal.
Yeah,
So I wish I could remember the name. I'm going to try to bring it up as we go through here and go through it, go through the rest of the schedule. But I see what you're talking about. It may just be somebody trying to put a hard hit on Mensa, just kind of as a, hey, we remember you, and hopefully it'll just be that.
yeah.
So, okay, so we have the Blue Devils undefeated through three games, and then NC State coming to town, your boys, your favorite people, the Wolf Pack.
Woo, bless them.
That's going to be a game. I think we'll know more about what to expect from the Wolfpack after that Thursday night game against East Carolina. But who do you think is going to win this game and why, Lee?
Again, I think, the first handful of games on the schedule, with the exception of Illinois, I think, there is going to be a talent differential in Duke's favor. I think, State's going to have some, key pieces back from injury last year that'll make it a little bit more interesting. I don't think it'll be quite, last year wasn't a blowout, but it didn't seem particularly close. It was one of those games. I think this will be a competitive game, but I don't, it's wild to say this, just, knowing Duke football and where we've been and where we're aspiring to go. But I don't think State has the horses to keep up in this one. I They don't really impress me on defense, which has been Doran's calling card for his best teams. Were pretty shut down defensive units, a la Peyton Wilson. Uh, I just I don't really see it with this State team. I think they've still got way too much to figure out on offense. If I'm not mistaken, this is their first year under a new offensive administration. And I think this might be the first time that a net majority of State fans are pulling for Duke in this game to try to, rid themselves of their current administration. So I don't see, State's never performed well in Wallace Wade. Um, so I don't see State pulling this one out. I see Duke taking this as well.
I agree with you on that one. And the reason that I agree with you is because yeah, Dave Doran has been there a long time and he's been better at NC State than I think really anybody has been. He's been more consistent at NC State than any of the other coaches who've come before him. I think he's won more games than any other head coach there, but he hadn't been able to get them over the mountaintop. And if you're asking me, is this the year where they do it? I say no. And part of the reason I say no is you mentioned that there's going to be a new offensive staff there. Sort of. It's our old friend Kurt Roper. And I'm not knocking Kurt. I'm not saying anything negative about him. Uh, but what I am saying is when NC State said, we're letting you replace your offensive coordinator, but you're doing it with somebody from within the staff. That's
I
sort of
think I've seen this film before.
exactly. That's a sign that says we don't necessarily believe in your long-term future, so we're not going to pay the money to get somebody. You're going to have to promote internally and then get somebody on the lower end up and coming to the coaching ranks to take over the spot. I think he was the running backs coach maybe last year. I
Yeah.
can't remember. But Kurt's done well, but I think this is a signal that the administration doesn't necessarily believe. And he was actually the running back coach, then the quarterback coach. Uh, and now he's offensive coordinator and quarterback coach. But I think what we see happening is the administration saying, we're done with Dave. If he has a great season, that's fantastic. But absent a miracle, we're going to move on. So we'll see.
Yeah, man, and I think, I think Kurt, like you said, I think he's a perfectly fine offensive coordinator. I think he's had, obviously had a you know, legendary success at Duke, for given the, immediate prior history of the program. And I think he's been serviceable. He's sort of fallen victim to some unfortunate administrations at the places he's been. Um, wasn't he in South Carolina with Muschamp?
He was, yeah.
And then was down with was he with McIntyre at Colorado? Do I remember that right?
He was, and he took over as the interim head coach, if I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah,
But they
just
had who was it? The guy who plays at he's the do everything guy for the 49ers. Debo.
oh Samuel, yeah,
He got hurt at South Carolina, I
yeah,
think, while they were there. And if he'd been healthy, I mean, God only knows.
yeah. And I always thought that Muschamp was one of those guys that if you look at the cream of the crop, most consistently successful college head coaches, they tend to be defensive first guys. But there's a fine line between defensive first and you know having enough understanding of offense to not only you know scheme your defense well, but also ensure that the guys on that side of the ball are doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I think one example I've always thought of like the pinnacle of the offensive coach being Chip Kelly's years at Oregon. No defense to speak of, but they just, their game plan was we're going to score more than you, so who cares about defense? And I think obviously Nick Saban and our friend down the road when he was in New England, being the prime examples of defensive influence coaches. I think you know the defensive coaches who know enough that they could be serviceable offensive coordinators themselves tend to be the best head coaches. I mean, as much respect as I have for Jim Knowles, that was one of the things that bit him when he was a head coach, the offensive side of the ball. So I think Kurt has been a victim of that fairly consistently. And I don't see this year being that much of a deviation from the mean. I just don't think they've got much in the stable.
And the player that I thought of earlier, whose name I could not remember, Jeremy McDuffie. That is who I was trying to think of. He suffered an injury against Georgia
Oh yeah.
Tech. It was
Yeah.
pretty bad to his knee, and then came back and played well. So
Yeah.
uh, I remember the hit he put on Georgia Tech's quarterback, and I think it was right in front of the Georgia Tech sideline. If this could be wrong, but for some reason I had it in my mind that the Georgia Tech quarterback had to come out of the game after that for a period of time. I don't remember that entirely clearly, and we don't need to explore why that might be the case. So we will move on to game 5, which will be on the road at that haunted dome, Syracuse, New York. Duke will go play the Orange at Syracuse. Who you going with, Lee?
Well, if you're speaking historically, Duke's had some success in Syracuse. I mean, we beat them, back in the little ACC championship run in the ugly jerseys. We beat them in 2020 when we really had no business beating anybody in the ACC. So I mean, if we're talking historically and going on vibes, I kind of like the Blue Devils for this one. Obviously, this is a much different Syracuse program and a much different Duke program. I like the matchup. I think it'll be a slog. Um, I think the key in this one will be that Syracuse has Clemson the week before. And I actually like Duke in a close one. I think, that's a tough game to bounce back from, especially when you assume Clemson will be as close to full strength as, they can be that early in the season. So I think this is one of those. I don't think Syracuse will overlook Duke because I think they're very well coached. Their staff's done a great job, obviously, but it's going to be a get back game for Clemson after what happened last year, and I would not want to be Syracuse the week following that. So
And we come in between Clemson and SMU. They're
yeah,
going to Clemson, then they are hosting us, and then they have to go to Gerald J. Ford Stadium in Dallas to take on SMU. And I will also say this too, looking at Syracuse's schedule, they've got Tennessee and Atlanta. Who okayed that? Gee, good night.
which I actually don't hate Syracuse in because of Tennessee's quarterback situation.
That's fair. Then UConn, though, and I think that's going to be a sneaky game. UConn is everybody's kind of dark horse. Watch that team get to 8 or something wins this season. We'll discuss that. So looking at the vibes that I'm getting from that schedule leading up to that, I do feel like in this stretch, Duke is going to lose one of 2 games, but I I kind of got to lean with you and think at this point, looking at all that, Duke's got a chance to be undefeated at at 5-0, which is weird to say. But then it turns and Duke's got to take another trip to go out to Cal, out to Berkeley and take on the Calgorithm, the Bears, the Golden Bears. Who are you thinking wins that game, Lee?
So we're getting to the point of the season where I think if there is two, you know, lose games you should have won on the schedule, I think it's these next 2 weeks, Cal, Georgia Tech. Um, I, you never want you never want to be in this situation anyway. It's hard to play out there. You're on a 6 hour time, well, 3 hour time difference, 6 hour flight. It's no real easy way to go about it. I think it'll have a lot to do with the game time. I think if we can get a, noon or later or a, 3 p.m. local or later game, I think that'll make a huge difference. And as far as, I mean, that's one thing that, sometimes it can be overblown, the effect on your body of that sort of travel. But the that I mean, in a game like this, one of the biggest keys is how well Duke does at being physically ready to play. Um, which I wouldn't want anyone else in my corner other than David Feely when it comes to that, and Noel Durfee. But I think Duke's the better team, and I think if Duke locks in and shows up, I think it's not a controversial thing to say that Duke will win this game. But Duke could very easily not win this game if they're not completely locked in, because as we saw last year, Cal doesn't have barn burning talent, but they are fairly well coached and they're decently consistent as far as their output. They don't, they struggle to, I think, separate themselves from their aptitude from their opponent's performance. They play to who they're playing, for lack of a better way to put it. So I like Duke, but this is a dangerous one.
And I'm looking at Cal from last season, and I do think Wilcox is on the hot seat. I don't think that's controversial, but it was a close game at Florida State, lost by 5, lost by a point at Miami, lost by 2 points at Pitt. Actually, the Miami game was at home, lost at home by 1 to NC State. A lot of those real close games. And those are things that, and I know they've lost some guys coming into this season. You kind of have to wonder what's going to happen, right? How is this team going to respond to that? I mean, their quarterback, Mendoza, which if you're a Simpsons fan like I am, Mendoza, you're going to be yelling. So how they respond to that, I don't know. But the part in my mind that is worrisome to me is you're going to Syracuse, then you're going to Cal, and you've got Georgia, you got a bye week coming up, and then you've got Georgia Tech right after that. And that Georgia Tech game is a big game. And what we remember last season, Duke started with 5 wins and then lost to Georgia Tech, and the Blue Devils were looking pretty gassed at that point, just because that's what happens in a season, right? You get tired after a while, and it's really hard to win a game. Maybe it's this game with Cal. Maybe it's the Syracuse game. I mean, we are actually winning that series 4-1, the Blue Devils. So I don't know. Is Syracuse due?
You talking about the Syracuse series?
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You
That's
know
what I'm
the one.
saying.
You know when the one was, right?
I remember.
Yeah,
I
when the
I
the
remember.
one we needed to make a bowl game. Yeah, that was us.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not blaming uh we'll just forget about that season. So but what I am saying is, of those two games, I could see one going against Duke. I still feel that way. So I'm going to take Cal in this game. But if Duke loses to Syracuse, then I'd flip that and say Duke beats Cal, if that
So
makes sense.
the other um, the other reason that I like Duke in this game is Cal also has a cross country trip the week before. They're playing Boston College at Boston College. And obviously, a cross country trip's not ideal to begin with, but especially that Bill O'Brien grinded out sort of throwback, probably objectively more Big Ten style team. One thing's, for certain, you're going to be exhausted. And that's not how Cal's built. So I do think, based off the circumstances surrounding the game, also, I like Duke in this one.
And actually, looking at the looking at the schedule rather for Cal, I still feel like one game is going to go against the Blue Devils in that 2 game stretch. But I'm gonna switch. I'm gonna take Duke in this one because Oregon State, Texas Southern, Minnesota. No knock on San Diego State, but San Diego State, then Boston College. I think we'll have played a better schedule leading up to that, and that'll help the Blue Devils. So we're both gonna have the Blue Devils at 6 wins and no losses heading into the bye week, and then a tough game against Georgia Tech. So Lee, who do you have when Georgia Tech comes to town on Saturday, October the 18th?
So this is going to be the point of the show where, everyone listening is going to go, "Oh, he's just a homer." But to be completely honest, and I'll caveat this by saying, if Duke is healthy, because this is a good Georgia Tech team. He shot, in the Georgia game last year, and they didn't lose much. Well, they didn't lose by much, and they didn't lose much coming back. Um, you know, if this game were in Georgia, I would pick Georgia Tech. But the fact that it's a bye week, the fact that we're coming off a game that I don't think will be a heightened risk of injury on Duke's part, the fact that Georgia Tech is not coming off a bye week and has Virginia Tech coming to see him the week before, which isn't a pushover of a program. Um, I think this is a good matchup as we saw last year. It was a good game. I think Duke matches up well to a lot of similar personnel that they're familiar with playing. That's the other thing with Georgia Tech. This is as transient as college football is these days. This is the rare program where you do have some, institutional memory and familiarity with their approach. And I do unironically like Duke in this one. I think it'll be a close one. I think it's one of those games that, if you show up with the how should I say this, Chuckamato-esque approach to special teams that we can often fall into in Durham these days. I think you can very easily lose this game, but I do see Duke pulling this out and going to 7-0 going into Clemson.
I am going to take Georgia Tech in that game. I'm not trying to be critical of Blue Devils, but I don't feel confident enough about the team yet to say that Duke's going to be able to beat Georgia Tech team that beat them last year. I will add though that I do think this is going to be a really, really good game because I think Brent Key is a very good coach. He's the kind of guy that you do not want your team to go up against because, again, I know they were 4-4 and then 7-6 and 7-6. They did have some injuries last year, but they are a hard-nosed football team. They get after it and they hit you in the mouth and they do not shy away from contact. They are a good team.
And
And
this is one of those series is that I think if we like, I think you're right, and the thing that would put me over to your way of seeing it is if this was in Atlanta, I think I would pick Georgia Tech without much hesitation.
and I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair, and I think that makes a lot of sense. But this team plays teams like Georgia really, really well in an 8 overtime game. And I think that's just it's going to be hard for the Blue Devils because the bye week helps, but then you got another bye week and then you got to play Clemson. I would have preferred to take Georgia Tech maybe at a different time in the season. So as of today, I've got to stick with Georgia Tech on that one. But then bye week, and then I'm at a wedding. A little bitter about that on November 1st.
Oh man.
I know I've told people about it on the podcast before. I don't want to repeat it now because I had tickets lined up that I could have gotten, but whatever.
Oh man,
I
I feel like
know.
you would have been at this one because of the Clemson connection.
Yeah,
Golly.
me and my boy Greg, we would have hung out and watched the game.
Oh,
But anyway, so
this
I'm gonna
must be a relative because it can't be a friend. No friend would do you like that.
it is a relative. That's so it's a relative. It's yeah.
Woo.
I know. I'm telling the story again, and I'm sorry to do it, but I'm still a little perturbed by it. But this is a big game against what looks like a good Clemson team, and the Blue Devils are going on the road to play the Tigers. Who you got, Lee?
I think this is where we come back down to earth. As much as I would love to echo my prediction from a few years ago of Duke upsetting the Tigers, which no one believed me and everyone thought I was just being a homer at that point, here we are. I think, Death Valley is a heck of a place to play. Clemson, I will say I don't necessarily buy the hype that they are the fourth best team in the country. I
I'm
don't,
not seeing that either.
yeah.
Not yet, anyway.
I think this is a aspirational on the part of the media that, maybe wanting Clemson to be more back than they are. Um, they're definitely going to be good. They're definitely going to, I think they're the foregone conclusion to be, one half of the eventual ACC championship. But I just don't. I think it's a good game. I don't see a world in which Duke gets blown out here. I might even venture to say that it would be one of those, nail biter, heartbreaker type outcomes. But I think assuming both teams are at full strength, Duke loses this one going to, what was that, 7-1?
That you've got them at 7-1. I have them at 6-2. And just a quick rundown on where the Blue Devil, or excuse me, where Clemson will be at this point. The Tigers have LSU, Troy, Georgia Tech week 3, Syracuse at home. Georgia Tech's on the road, then a bye week. Then they've got to go to the wine and cheese crowd up at Chapel Hill. Then on the road to Boston College, and then SMU, but at home before a bye week. So if you're Clemson, I would not be surprised if Clemson beats LSU in the Battle of the Tigers. I think there's starting to be some doubts to creep in about that LSU team. I've heard a lot of people say, hey, is this really what we hired Notre Dame's coach to do, to have us where that team is? I mean, I think a little bit more is being expected of Brian Kelly now. I think there's some pressure on him. But looking at the schedule, I think if Clemson's as good as everybody says, they maybe have one loss coming into that Duke game, right? Because between BC, SMU, and Georgia Tech, they've got to go up to BC, which can be a weird place to play, and they've got to go on the road to Georgia Tech. They catch SMU at home, but SMU, good team. I mean, you think maybe one loss for them heading into a November 1st showdown with the Blue Devils?
Yep, I think that's fair.
But if you're right and Clemson's not that good, that could be a two-loss team at that point. So we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so then Duke has to go on the road again, and this is a game that can bite you. Um, you got to go on the road to UConn. And Lee, you remember what I said to you last year about what was going on in Wallace Wade? That was a tough game. It was real tight, and Duke came back and got it. But that could be kind of a sneaky competitive game. What do you think?
Oh, I don't think it's going to be sneaky competitive. Oh, I think it's going to be very competitive. I think again, this is one of those games where talent wise, I think Duke, takes this in a head-to-head matchup. I think this is one where more the circumstances of the season are going to govern. All this caveated by saying Duke has to be healthy for this to all to play out. Um, I think you also, the fact that there are still players on this Duke roster who have been to UConn who, this isn't their first go around. You've obviously, there's most of the players in the roster have played them because obviously last year. And I think if we had blown them out last year, just from a, human, um, you know, human psychology standpoint, I think if we'd blown them out last year, it's sort of like us. We blew out Charlotte and then went down and lost there because I think there was, you're not taking them seriously. I don't think there's a player in this whole locker room that's going to overlook UConn after the game last year. Again, and that game wasn't one of those where, it was not as close as the final score indicated. Duke lost the game more than UConn won it, but I mean, it was enough beating around the bush to put a scare in Duke. So the fact that this is an opponent they've seen regularly, this is a stadium they've played in within the past 2 years. I don't see Duke dropping this one. I do think that, and also I don't, you know, I think even as good a job as Elko did, you still saw they overlooked a few games in those course of those 2 years. Occasionally, they would be talent wise, they would be talented enough to make up for that. But one thing I will say about the Diaz, administration so far, they have not overlooked anything. This team's come out to play. They have taken every opponent seriously. I think the difference being that UConn last year hit them in the mouth, and we were still in that period of the season where the offense was trying to get its identity figured out. I think this is late enough in the year also. If we were going to UConn early in the year, I'd be more inclined to pick UConn's way. But I think at this point in the season, a road trip non-conference opponent can sometimes be a bit of a boon to try to sort of get everyone back together. So I like Duke in this.
Yeah, so we agree on that. I've always been high on Jim Moore as a coach, and I think he's doing a good job. I think you just have to be a little more patient at a place like UConn. So we'll see if that continues this year for for the Huskies. But after that, Duke comes back home and plays UVA. And here's the only thing that kind of worries me about that UVA game is that could be interim coach territory for the Cavaliers.
Yeah,
And so I think Duke wins that game, but I would be sweating a little bit more if UVA has decided to turn the page on its head coach and has decided uh, to move on from Tony Elliott. But what are your thoughts on that one?
this is one of those where, you have so much more flexibility in game planning when you are a defensive predicated team, which I think is the beauty of this Duke team. And I think the although it's the same base, scheme, the nuances that Diaz throws in from the what everyone runs a variation of the 4-2-5 now, but I think his is so well equipped to be a ball control, pass pressure, linebackers flying, sideline to sideline, as opposed to Elko, where linebackers had a much more active role in pass defense, and as you see how that worked out, on 4th and 16. Um, you know,
Uh,
I think Duke's ability to slow down this game. When you're really good on defense, you can win a lot of games ugly. I think this is going to be an ugly game. I don't see Duke running away with this, but this is yet another one of those where I just don't see where UVA pulls the talent from. I mean, they've they've not reloaded. They didn't lose a lot, but they didn't have a lot to lose. Not to give them bulletin board material on the off chance that anyone from Charlottesville listens to this, but I just I don't see this, and I don't see UVA wanting to play this game. I see Duke having a lot of motivation to win it at this point in the season, especially if the season goes about as well as we think it can or has the chance to. And I think because it's UVA and because it's such a familiar opponent, I don't see the danger of a look past game. Just because I think that's another thing. I think if UConn had been the week before Carolina, I think UConn would have been a lot more dangerous too. But UVA, you can get up for.
all right, so the last two games of the season, then you've got the Blue Devils at, let me see here, only one loss so far, right? So you've got them at what, 9-1? Is that right?
That's right.
And I've got them at 8-2, but I am kind of feeling like it might be a 7-3 situation based on kind of what we've talked about. It would surprise me if that happens. But then the last two are key. If Duke can win these in addition to the week 4 matchup, this could be a second state championship victory. And that beautiful trophy that we raised last year, we'll get to raise again. We got to go on the road to Keenan Memorial and play the Tar Heels and Belichick. I have some thoughts about that game. Belichick is Belichick, and I don't want to create any sort of motivation for the Tar Heels
Oh,
or
speak for
anything. I
yourself.
mean, I know they listen to this podcast. I know that. I know that they come over here to get the pulse of the Duke fans. I get that. I just don't see today Carolina being at a spot to really come out and be the dominant team. Maybe some people in the media think that that team can be. I just do not see Carolina beating Duke as of today. I don't know. Maybe Carolina gets hot and they believe, and then if you believe, anything's possible, right? But I just looking at who Duke has, looking at where the teams have been the last several years. I got to go with Duke in that one. Where are you, Lee?
Well, Ben, you know that, the tried and true playbook of hiring a known commodity at the professional level who can manage men, who can control personalities, who has the financial expertise to be able to champion or to effectively lead and organize a program the size of the sleeping giant that is the University of North Carolina. That's just a proven method for success. By the way, how is John Bunning these days? Um, you know that you know I mentioned this in a conversation previously, but Bill Belichick is who you hire to coach your college team. The person who hires Bill Belichick to coach their college program is the same person who watches the Super Bowl for the commercials. I mean, I can assure you that the conversation sounded something like, "Oh, well, we need a football coach. Oh, well, I heard that Lombardi guy's good. Oh, wait, he's dead. Well, who's the next best? Belichick? Okay, yeah, let's get him." Like, I mean, the it boggles my mind that the entire media apparatus, even people I think very highly of, have just granted the premise, that, oh, well, this hire proves that Carolina, sorry, I'm ranting. This hire proves that Carolina is serious about being a big time football program. Not a soul has followed that up with why. Why does hiring a guy that is what, 6 months younger than the guy you just fired for being old and out of touch with modern college
It's
football?
a youth movement, Lee.
Right. Like, it's the simplest question in the world. Why does that prove that? This guy's never coached in college. This guy's never had to deal with the TikTok generation of Generation Z's putting into, college football rosters across the country. This guy doesn't know what in the world. And that's the other thing. Oh, he's been a general manager for the New England Patriots.
I have
Yeah,
some thoughts on that.
when there were clear-cut parameters, there was contractual clarity, and there was collective bargaining in place to dictate the the framework that you were working in. This is the wild freaking West. This guy didn't have a clue because no one has a clue. That's no shot against Belichick. No one has a clue what's going on right now. It blows my mind that in all the brain trust, no one has asked why is the flagship public institution of the state of North Carolina paying $10 million to a college football coach that's never been a college football coach before.
Here, there are a lot of questions there, and here's what I will say about it. Because with a rivalry, you try not to say things that will get your rival all fired up. But let me just
Oh,
here,
I've got a
here.
theory from Carolina. I can. I'll
Well, yeah, you're off the solicitation email list for the law school after that. I mean, we know that. I'll reach out to the development office. I'll take care of
oh
it.
man.
But here's my thought. Bill Belichick without Tom Brady, look at 2020, 7-9, 10-7, 8-9, 4-13. Okay. Before he went to Brady, 5-11, right?
But
Look at
those Browns teams.
Yeah, he had one really good year with Cleveland. They were 11-5, 36-44 total. Okay. So the point that I am trying to make here is without Tom Brady, there's not been a lot of success. And what he's done by hiring, and I'm not going to say Freddie Kitchens was a terrible hire as the offensive coordinator. Well, look, because the reason I'm not going to say that is I don't really know. I'll say this: he's been at North Carolina for a little bit. Okay, the offense wasn't necessarily the problem last year, but in fairness, it's not like they were really, you know, lighting it up under him either with really, really great guys. If you want to just keep some guys there for the first season to keep the familiarity going, I can understand that. And I'll say, okay, fine. The hire that doesn't make any sense to me is Steven Belichick as the defensive coordinator. That to me says this is a guy who's doing it for his son. doing it for other people. He's not necessarily in it himself. The whole summer narrative about that, this looked like a lot of older lawyers who've hung around longer maybe than they should have and are trying to set their kids up. Okay. If you haven't been made familiar to that yet, Lee, you will one day and you will know exactly what I'm talking about. This will click in your mind. That's the part where you got to be thinking um, if you are a Carolina fan, that's the part that should worry you more than anything else. I'm not going to get into the stuff with his girlfriend. I think there's a whole lot of creepy elements of guys talking about women, particularly young women. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to talk about it. But the Steven Belichick hire, I think, tells you that this could be a very interesting season in Carolina, and it would not necessarily be one that if I were a Carolina fan, I would be crazy about. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
what's your reason to hire Steven Belichick, other than he's your son?
Well, both of us acknowledging that Freddie is the more proven commodity. Let's just take a brief review of Freddie's coaching tenure and see 24 interim head coach Carolina, tight ends coach and run game coordinator, 22 South Carolina senior analyst, 21 New York Giants interim offensive coordinator for a few games, and was hired as the tight ends coach there in 20. But the Browns, he was the head coach. In 18, he was the
Hey,
interim.
but 6-10 in Cleveland, that's like 12-4 anywhere else.
Well, that's true. Thinking back to that meme of or that reel of Baker Mayfield talking about him when he walks away. Um, so I'm looking back through his career back to when he was the running backs coach and tight ends coach at Glenville State in 1999, and I see all of two stints as interim offensive coordinator, aside from his tenure as head coach with the Browns. So all of one time has he been intentionally hired um, to head up or make decisions as to who would be the offensive coordinator. The other two times he was the best guy still in the room with a job. So, God bless him. But wow, the multi-million dollar assistant staff and the two people you picked to lead it are one that's never been intentionally hired as an offense coordinator before and your son.
Yeah, you know, I can understand keeping him there for when you come in, you try to keep a guy maybe, yeah, he'd been at North Carolina since
Oh yeah.
2023, which
Like
isn't
JC Price at Virginia Tech. He's like the heart and soul of the staff to the extent that you could say that about a Mac Brown staff, a little lacking in heart and soul. But
right. But I'm not saying he's a guy you keep there forever. I mean, he'd been at South Carolina since 2022. So you say, okay, we're just going to keep this guy here. But eh, I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to be, well, you guys know where to find me.
let the hate flow through you, Ben.
I will post where my seats are going to be. Come find me at the Illinois game. I'll be a little bit more
Woo.
open. I just, this to me, the way that they've gone about this, he's going to be on some Hulu documentary thing all season. I saw the Carolina team is. It just seems like for a guy who prided himself on limiting the distractions, there's just a lot of distractions and a lot of real judgment call questions here that you just say, are you really in it for North Carolina, or do you want to wear the Navy sweatshirt for your CBS Sunday morning interview? That's, and if you know, you know. So we'll leave it at that. We both got the Blue Devils winning that game. You have got them at 10-1, returning home to close the season out at Wallace Wade. I have them at 9-2, but dang it, I think I'm gonna go with the way that this is gonna shake out. I'm gonna end up with the driving prediction, the Richlandia prediction. But we'll see what Lee thinks about this game.
Again, I've got a lot of respect for the Wake Forest program. Got a couple friends over there that have come through. One that's still on the staff. I think that they've got the right guy, and frankly, I think Wake is doing a good job of investing in their athletic department to the extent needed to be a competitive small private ACC school in the new age. I mean, they've got the best indoor facility in the state, not even close. I mean, they have a beautiful athletic campus over there, and they're only getting better. I think this is it's a tough it's a tough ask in a head coach's first season. I think Duke's got the skill advantage here, so I think Duke pulls it out, but I don't think it's a pushover. And I think we're going to end the season with two games that Duke will take them both, but they'll have a lot in common with the state game last year. There'll be wins, there'll be games that the outcome's not really in doubt, but they won't be pretty and they won't be a particularly um, great showing by either team. That all is to say, if Duke is going to have the season that we could have this year, something has to change on the special teams side of the ball. The special teams effort last year
Now,
was
Lee. Now, Lee.
beyond abysmal.
Lee. Come on. Come on. I mean, it's like you're suggesting that we just struggled to advance the ball on returns. I mean, that's crazy talk.
It's and I will also preface this by saying special teams is hard to discuss because 9 times out of 10, you don't know what to look at for what went wrong. Case in point, this at the SMU game last year,
Right.
we either missed or had blocked was it four, three or four?
Well, the block was, I think, a technique blocking issue on the front line that they
Well, no,
changed.
I
Yeah.
mean but it was
No,
four.
our kicking game struggled last year. The field goal kicking was not as good as it had been. And I wonder if sometimes just there's a little bit of a sophomore slump, and I wonder if that's what was going on. But I agree with your overall assessment.
All that is to say, but I think it was four that there was something wrong, whether we missed it or got blocked. Only one of them, from what I could tell, was Todd's fault. I mean, I think Todd's a good kicker. I think he's, who we want back there. But you look at that game, one of them, again, there's not necessarily the things that get noticed, but one of them was a bad snap that the holder had to improvise with. One of them was just a bad hold, and one of them, the offensive lineman is still looking at the grass in front of him as opposed to the SMU DB that just did a standing leap
Which
over.
was a heck of a play. Let's be for real. I
I
mean,
mean, yeah,
that,
oh yeah,
I mean,
but like he almost concussed himself because I mean he didn't even have to put his hands up. The ball darn near hit him in the helmet. I mean, like just like and I not to go on another soapbox, but the just a bunch of stuff that at the end of the day, one of the things that frustrates me about the spread West Coast offense is you outthink yourself a lot of the time. Duke's special teams right now, we're outthinking ourselves. When's the last time you saw Duke get a punt block before last year? But yet then again, I remember scheming against this exact special teams approach when the Diaz crew was at Miami. And I mean, we did fairly well against them in that phase of the game the entire time he was there. I think Manny Diaz is a heck of a coach. I love the fact that he's in Durham. I think he's a great person. Um, he's the guy I want leading my program, but by God, we got to get over the Chuck Amato, Bobby Bowden approach to special teams. Like we're going to lose some games over this because we have already.
and I said sophomore slump. I misspoke a little bit. I meant his second full year as the starter.
Yeah.
And there was a little bit, he'd been 78% in 2023, and then last year it was 75%. So there was just, to your point, things did feel a little bit off, and I'm referring to his field goal numbers. There was one block, of course. So, but I agree with you. I think that we do need to see some improvement there. But I'm going to take Duke to win that game. You're taking the Blue Devils as well. Is that right?
I am.
So you've got Duke going 11-1, which is one loss to Clemson. My numbers broke down to 10-2, but I feel like this team probably kind of feel like they'll probably lose at least one more. Just in there with the vagaries of the schedules, but perhaps not. Perhaps that won't happen. So as weird as this feels, I'm going to go ahead and take Duke at 10-2. That could be enough to get them in an ACC championship game. We will see.
And
Uh,
here's my quick Easter egg. Look at who Miami ends the season with, their last two games.
Now you're going to make me do some research here. I'm not worried about Miami, by the way, getting into the championship game. I look, while I look that up, let me just say this. Cristobal, sure, he can recruit people, but he can't, he is a coaching disaster. I mean, he doesn't know how to take a knee for God's sakes, right? So what else do we need to say about that?
Larry Fedora would like a word.
Um, ooh, yeah, Miami's got to go on the road to Virginia Tech and then to Pittsburgh, and
Mhm.
Pittsburgh's probably going to beat Miami.
Mhm.
Say what you want about your buddy up in Pitt, but he can coach some hard-nosed wins, and going on the road to Virginia Tech is never easy. Uh, it's a challenging place to play, and Pat Narduzzi's in season 11 at Pitt, and I think the expectations are high for this very overly defensive-minded team. So, but look, I just don't think they had a really good quarterback last year, and they couldn't get into the ACC championship game. And I think a lot of that's because of Cristobal. I mean, yeah, sure, it was cool, but again, the goal was not to be left out of the college football playoff, and that's what happened. Am I wrong about that one?
Yeah, I think the irony is that given you saw the progression that Diaz had at Miami, I think if they left him in place, Miami, we'd be talking about Miami right now the way we're talking about Clemson. I think they were getting it figured out. There was some, I think, uh, personality issues rather than personnel. But that's something that longevity at a place can help address. I think Cristobal is fairly limited as a coach. I think you're absolutely right. And it's you don't want to harp on one mistake, but when it's things like some coaches, for lack of a better way to put it, approach games like they're playing a game of Madden, and not kneeling the ball or like thinking, oh, they weren't trying to get an extra, like they weren't trying to get a guy over 100 yards rushing, like just not thinking in that moment at all is indicative of deeper issues. And, Duke, if not for a couple not great calls and a couple untimely injuries last year, Duke gave a run for their money in Miami. So I think you're right.
And I do think that was not the first time Cristobal had something like that happen.
Yeah.
So again, when you have Ward at quarterback, that can do things to your team, right? When he came in and played for you, you're going to be really good. I mean,
Yeah.
Cam Ward was a really unique player, and you close out the season with uh losing two of your last three. I mean, I'm sorry, but that shouldn't happen. And I do think again, Georgia Tech knocks them off, right? And I, that's just a reflection of Cristobal. So I'm not going to apologize for my opinions on that. So we've got Duke having a really good season. You've got them at 10-2, or I've got them at 10-2. You've got them 11-1. If that holds, Duke should be going to the college football playoff, right? Certainly at 11-1. Maybe they'll get ranked this year. Who knows? But let's hope you're right about that. But Lee, you know the drill. Why don't you take advantage of the open mic that I'm going to turn over to you now?
Absolutely. I will say also, if we're gonna if we're gonna, take the, mediation approach and try to bracket this thing, I will say 11-1 is my high end. 9-3 is my low end. I see Syracuse and Tech as the biggest threats on the schedule outside of Death Valley. So we can, write that down and see where we are this time at the end of the season. Um, but it's always a pleasure to be on. I think this is a really exciting Duke team. I think a lot of will be predicated on how well we can run the ball, and that has a lot to do with has as much to do with, the guys in the field as it does when you're running this sort of offense with the schematic approach. Um, I think I think when it works well, this offensive approach is dynamite. I mean, this comes from the, Mike Leach coaching tree, Texas Tech run and shoot, Graham Harrell, Michael Crabtree kind of approach. So if Duke can get that going, then who am I to, look down my nose at the offensive approach this season? But I think the ceiling is very high. And as far as open mic, this is if you're listening to this in North Carolina, we're in an off year, but that means that you very likely have a city council or county commission or town council race happening this year near you. Pay attention, read up, get to know these folks. Unlike the state and federal races, more often than not, you can go meet your mayor, you can go meet your town councilman, and actually have a relationship with the people that make the decisions that interact with your life in a lot of ways more than the president, your congressperson do. So make sure you're registered to vote, ready to participate. It doesn't matter who you vote for; it matters that you vote. And this country only works when we participate. So don't let this chance go to waste.
Well, great and inspiring words, Lee. I have nothing so great, but I will throw out my bracket for Duke is a low of 8-4 and a high of 10-2. But boy, do I like your bracket better. So hopefully that will be the case. And hopefully Duke will have another great season. It was a great one last year. Hopefully it'll be even better this year. I do not know when I will be back on the podcast airwaves. As you remember from the last episode with Steve, this is a scaled back version of the Bull City Coordinators podcast, but I will come back at some point this season. A 2-week trial that I had set for October has gone to the land of happy case files. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So hopefully one of the bye weeks will come back. We'll do another episode. But until then, you know where to find us, bullcitycoordinators.com. We're on all the socials, either at Antiquity Pod or at Duke FB Coverage. Check out our companion podcast, the Classical Antiquity Side Quest. Give us a call if you have any questions, any comments, anything that you do want to go over. I did have an episode. I did have a voicemail, which I forgot to throw in. So I will probably tack that on here at the end. So we'll listen to that at the end. But if you do want to get in your thoughts or have questions or whatever, just call the podcast 540-632-0160. And since I'm not going to be on as much, shoot me an email, bullcitycoordinators@gmail.com. And as always, go Duke.
Duke.
Hey, Ben, it's your wife. Now since you're slowing down on the pod, does that mean you can get that milk now? Really appreciate it. Anyways, love you. Bye.